Most people will be shocked or surprised at how much they actually spend on certain categories and certain things. And you need to come face to it. So to me, the only way is you have to come face to face to your spending. And so you have to just take a look. And it's as simple as looking back at your past statements and categorizing it.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne.
And I'm Antonia.
And in this episode, we'll be discussing how to transform your finances one step at a time. Joining us today is Mat Megens, the founder and CEO of Hyperjar, a platform dedicated to helping people simplify their finances. Matt is also the author of 10 Things I Love About Money and the winner of the Best Book for Personal Finance Gold Award in this year's inaugural Investing Insiders Financial Book Awards. Matt, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you so much for having me. Great being here.
Amazing. Well, first of all, we'd both like to extend a massive congratulations to winning the award. Your book is incredible and it received a lot of praise from our judges. Some of the feedback that kind of stood out was one person really appreciated your humor and dedication to simplifying complex financial subjects. Another judge said that they really liked your writing style and the clarity of expression. It was fresh, thoughtful, and accessible. And another judge said that it was brilliant and a very simple introduction to the world of money.
No, when I read the feedback, I was very flattered, and also it was exactly the type of feedback I was hoping for. I was hoping to try and make this more approachable and different from what exists today. So the fact that was how it was received made me very happy.
Even actually the front cover of the book, which I've got in my hands here, on the front cover, it says simple rules to spend and save your way to wealth and happiness. And there's a couple of words which stand out there. And one is simple, because everyone always thinks that finance is going to be so complex. And then spend. You never hear people recommending or suggesting spend. So it's quite nice to have that on the front cover, because it makes it feel a little bit less like, oh, that's just going to constrict my life and make it all a little bit miserable. I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. It all sounds a lot more approachable like that.
And that's exactly, again, what I was trying to achieve with this, is that the reality is everyone has to spend. You have to spend to survive. And a lot of joy comes from spending money. And I was trying to make this a book to try and connect the idea of wealth with your daily spending, and to try to get across the message that life doesn't have to be miserable. You don't have to be miserable and, completely frugal in a way that makes life unenjoyable and also accumulate wealth. Like, those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can spend money, but do it smartly without waste, and also accumulate wealth. And anyone can do this. And I was trying to get that point across. And I don't think many books on wealth, or certainly investment, talk about that sort of core first tenet, which is you have your income and you have to spend to survive and spend to live. What's the point of life anyways? But at the same time, there's a bigger picture. I was trying to sort of capture all that in a way to make it feel like, it's doable. Anyone can do this. And it doesn't have to be miserable.
Yeah, exactly. You've had quite a sort of interesting pivot in your career, because you didn't start out in finance, did you?
No, so I started out as an electrical engineer, and I grew up on a farm, and my parents were basically farmers, and we didn't know anything about, I guess, professional careers, but I was good at maths in school. So it's basically, if you're good at math, you become an engineer or perhaps a doctor. And so that's sort of why I chose engineering, just because I was good at math in school. So there was no real planning, there was no real guidance, there was no mentorship. But I always did enjoy finance for some reason. I was a bit of a precocious child in terms of just money and reading the newspaper. So I always had that. Yeah, I always would read the newspaper.
That.
No, I was a bit odd that way, and I don't know why, but maybe from shows I watched and movies I watched. But this is like back in like the Wall Street, I guess the 1980s Wall Street days. So I'm sure I was influenced in some way in that small little farm in Canada. But I always had that interest. So when I eventually did a career pivot, it was actually quite natural and got more to my interest. So I have to say, like, my finance career was far more personally satisfying for me than my engineering career, because it was more to my interests.
Was it a difficult pivot to make, or did it kind of like, how did it come about?
Yeah, so the actual career pivot was led by doing an MBA. So that graduate degree is definitely like the clear precursor to my changing career. And there was definitely a sense of, I guess, I wouldn't say disgruntlement, maybe perhaps dissatisfaction with my career up to that point. I was working within a startup, so I do like that startup world. But as an engineer, as like sort of a cog, that particular cog I didn't enjoy, whereas I enjoyed all hearing about the fundraising and hearing about trying to grow the business. So that side of the startup really enticed me. So that encouraged me to try to find something different. Then when I did my MBA, did it in New York. So I was exposed to, Wall Street and finance. And that was definitely exciting for me. So once I was immersed in that sort of world, it became very natural. Like this seemed really exciting. This seemed interesting. I was intellectually interested in it. I could see a personal interest in it. So it's happened quite quickly once I did that, I guess, that schooling decision. And then once school started and once I got my first job, it all led quite naturally from there.
Right. What was the first job after you qualified?
So I had an internship with Morgan Stanley in fixed income. And then I actually had, so it was in the London office, and I was given a job offer, but it was 2005 was my internship. So this was like the peak days of banking before the credit crisis. And I got a job offer from Lehman Brothers and a competing job offer from Lehman Brothers. So I actually accepted that because at the time they were the hottest bank. It was going to be on the hottest desk, which was, believe it or not, subprime mortgage trading. And that was where the most excitement was. So that's my first job, was within Lehman Brothers subprime mortgage trading.
Okay, so
wow.
Are you in London now?
Yeah, so I'm based in London now. So when I made that career, basically when I got the job offer, this was pre-Brexit. I had a Dutch passport, so I'm a dual citizen, Canada and Netherlands. So I thought I'll take advantage of this Dutch passport, see the world a little bit. And I took the job offer in London, and I've been here since.
You haven't managed to go anywhere else.
That's
all right.
Really incredible. And such a sort of rich career history as well, which has taken you on quite a journey. How did you get the inspiration to write 10 Things I Love About Money?
So it was a funny little sequence of events. The first was, to be honest with you, Wiley, the publisher, actually approached me somewhat randomly and just asked if I wanted to write a book, if I had any thoughts based on, my career to date. And so then that got me thinking, because I always had certain ideas for writing a book, although it hadn't been really active. And then I came up with some ideas, which eventually led to a proposal very similar to what the book is. They liked it. They accepted that. And then as I was writing the book, it sort of evolved. It went from a bit more of a generic finance primer to much more specific, as it is today, about these like 10 very specific rules with more of a spending focus. And so I'd say it evolved, but it was prompted by this approach from the publisher. And similarly, during that time within my career, so I had founded Hyperjar, the fintech, and I was pivoting my way out of the company. So had grown to a certain point. We had brought in some new management, and I was ready to do something a bit different. So it aligned quite nicely because I sort of spoke to the team and said, listen, this book can help promote the Hyperjar mission because this aligns, and it can help me to sort of step back a little bit and gather my thoughts in a way that it could almost serve as like the Bible for what Hyperjar represents, the perfect Hyperjar. So that's sort of how it started, and that's sort of where it got to the point where I wrote the book and stepped back even further from the company.
So what's the process of writing a book like that? Do you have someone sort of guiding you through it, or do you just lock yourself away in a room and gather your thoughts, or how do you bring it to life?
Yeah, so that was definitely a very large learning experience for me. And I would say so I started, it was around May of, 24. So May of 24, I sort of got the approval roughly, let's say May, June. And my manuscript was due December of 24. So I had like a roughly 6-month time frame was sort of the timeline that was given. And that timeline was so critical because if it didn't have a timeline, it probably would have taken who knows how many years it would have taken. But what I learned through that process, so at first, as I was writing and I felt this pressure to write, so I'd sit down and just try, like, almost like a job, like sit down and I'm going to write. And what I found is I was writing this crap. I'd write, I wrote stuff, it just wasn't very good. I wasn't very satisfied with it. And I would procrastinate a little bit and it wouldn't go very well. I got to August and I had someone sort of read over what I had and they're very critical. It's like, okay, this term seems irrelevant and that doesn't really seem to connect. And I eventually ended up throwing out the entire, I had like at that point, I think I roughly promised 80,000 words and I had written 80,000 words and I threw it out entirely. This is August. So now I was a bit panicking and said, okay, now what am I going to do? And I started to go from first principles and started to break it down and started to just do like smaller sections of writing. But what happened is I realized that some days I just felt inspired. And when I had those days where I felt inspired, I would just write. And I would just keep writing and I would flow out. I could do 10,000 words in a day, like easily. And then another day I would feel just no inspiration, no ideas. What I learned was on those days, just don't write. So I literally just didn't force myself. I didn't try. And that for me was the key. So whenever I didn't force myself, but when I was feeling good, I sort of went for it. Then within about a 3-week period, I almost wrote the book. And it was just by me being a bit more intuitive. That is me personally, but that me being intuitive, not forcing things, led to better writing, faster productivity. And then during that process, while I did have a couple of editors who would help me, it was more technical editing, less about content. The content was more from friends. I had certain friends who would help me with like certain ideas and certain formations and some of the humor. So I'd say my friends helped me greatly with that. The publisher was much more about the technical structure and perhaps how you sort of break down the chapters. So, and that became more intense at the end. Once I had by the way, I wrote 130,000 words. So I was like 50,000 words over and I said, hey, like this is all a masterpiece. I can't get rid of anything. And they said, no, I'll sort of 80,000 hard limit. And it maybe even been like 60,000. They said, okay, we'll let you go up to 80,000. So that was pushing it. So I had to cut out 50,000 words. And I thought, okay, this is impossible. And then it's going to be, complete crap and can get rid of all my great ideas. But then as I did that process of paring it down, it made it 10 times better. There was so much redundancy, so much, again, crap, that process of bringing it from 130,000 down to 80,000 actually made the book just much tighter, more succinct. The ideas flowed much better. So it was the best thing being forced to bring that word count down.
Yeah, I think actually there's so much to be said for that because less is often more when it comes to communicating about finance because it's not everyone's natural space. And some people find it like a very dry subject. And, what everyone's saying about your book is that you've managed to take a very dry subject and make it fun to read and relatable and all of those sort of things. So I can totally understand what you're saying there. Did you have somebody particular in mind when you were writing it? Like, were you writing it for a specific group or a specific person or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wanted to have the book have as much reach and applicability as possible. So, and that's the same philosophy I had when I started Hypergyre. I tried to step in the shoes of the potential customer, and obviously you try to find the broadest customer base as possible. If you design it for yourself and just for yourself, it's unlikely to be successful. Now that said, I did try to solve my problems with the company, and when I was writing the book, I tried to think about a lot of like what my problems were. But then I was very deliberate in trying to ensure that my problems were that I experienced or my anecdotes, but I use a lot of anecdotes to try and make it more entertaining, were anecdotes that would have high applicability to a typical person. So I'd say I wrote it, in a lot of ways, it was like reflective on myself and my experience, but I was very careful to try and pick the anecdotes that I thought would have the most resonance or the most usefulness for people, because I've had a lot of adventures in my life, let's say, and like a lot of the stories I mentioned in the book, like there's 100 more but those were ones I picked that I thought would be the most relevant and people would resonate with them the most to hopefully learn a lesson that I learned the hard way that my readers could not have to learn the hard way.
Right. It sounds like your life experiences and things like that, you've been able to draw on that a lot. So remind me when you set up Hyperjar.
It would have been about 10 years ago. So like 2016 or so, roughly around that time frame.
So I mentioned that I use Hyperjar for my kids because it's actually a really good cost-effective solution and it helps parents keep control of what their children are spending, and it helps children to get into good financial habits. And there's lots of functionality to the app and everything like that. So what brought that on? Like, what were you sort of filling a need in yourself, or a societal need, or what sort of led you to create that?
Yeah, so Hyperjar, and that could be a whole episode on the Hyperjar itself, but the original idea was this crowdsourced working capital in the era of 0% interest rates. And the concept was, because I had come from a trade finance working capital background at Morgan Stanley, and I was frustrated with the product that we had delivered. So this was a solution to that frustration that I had. So the very simple idea was, if I'm someone who has some savings, let's say I have £1,000, it's earning nothing in my bank account. I don't necessarily want to take equity risk for whatever reason. And that's a separate topic. We shouldn't talk about just the whole, equity markets and risk and volatility.
I'm getting the feeling we're going to need to get you on quite a lot, man.
It's a lot of ground to cover. Yeah.
So the idea was, let's say I'm a John Lewis or Waitrose shopper. And they inspired this a bit because they had this concept of, I could buy effectively John Lewis bonds. So you could effectively, as a customer of John Lewis, you could invest in John Lewis, and rather than earning pure interest, you would earn vouchers on your shopping. It was like a really novel concept that John Lewis had done. So that inspired this a bit as well. But the idea was, could I prepay my shopping to John Lewis or Waitrose, and they pay me an interest rate, but it would effectively be extra shopping credit at this shop. So let's say I have £1,000, I give it to John Lewis, they're going to pay me, let's say 10% per annum. And after the year, if I keep it in for a year, I'd have £1,100, and I can then use that to shop at John Lewis. Imagine I'm trying to save up for Christmas, or imagine I just buy lots of groceries anyways, so I'm going to spend that money anyways. Well, if I commit it in advance, then I get a bonus for doing that. So, and the benefits are sort of obvious. As a shopper, I get that extra shopping power. As a store, I thought it would be about the fact that they get diversified sources of capital, which was true to a degree, the CFOs would tell me. However, the more powerful thing for the shop was the fact that they're getting this commitment. And a committed shopper in this day and age of cutthroat, Amazons and everyone looking for the best deal possible. People care less about the experience necessarily. To lock in a customer is quite powerful, more for the CMO. So they would pay for that. So it's not just the cost of capital, but it's also, you've secured a customer, you've probably got some upsell, just like typical gift cards, upsell. So that was the idea. And then what happened is there's a bit chicken and egg, because they said, okay, we like this idea. However, you have no customers, so we're not going to force some big integration to this new, because it requires some kind of technical integration to sort of deliver something like this. So I had to try and solve, how do I create customers to make them happy, but the customers want the deal, but they're not going to give me the deal because they need the customers. So I had this chicken and egg problem. So we thought, but how do we need to make something just generally useful for people within this sort of spirit of saving. And then that's where it came into my problems I was having in my life, is as having kids and having more kids and trying to manage the budgets and finances. And I'm an expat, so I'm just trying to figure out how everything works anyways and what kind of things are available for my kids. So I thought, at the very least, I want something to help control my kids' spending, to help get them to learn how to spend well. And that sort of led to this idea of jars to sort of help people with savings. And then because it was a shared thing, the idea you could share jars, and you could share them with kids or you could share them with other adults. So it all sort of led from this trying to make just something useful that didn't exist in the market. And then the idea would be we'd grow that customer base, and then we could then present them relevant contextual offers that eventually are just savings-based incentives from the shops.
It is fascinating to get that background and see the ways in which your career and also the technical aspects of finance have influenced how you've been able to simplify it so well. One thing that I love in the book, 10 Things I Love About Money, is the concept of those spending personalities. So there is that kind of science behind the way that we spend and working out what motivates you to spend and also not demonizing you at the same time. It would be great to find out a bit more about how you develop those personality types, and I suppose learn a bit more about your journey from one to, the more utopian spending type.
Yeah. So the thinking around that was, I guess it's from my personal experience and also from having run the company, is you realize how different everybody is. And this was even just my fellow employees, because you obviously want your employees to be doing well in their lives and financially. And there's always, you have your salary and your benefits packages and such. But you also want to ensure people aren't like making stupid decisions in life. And just me as a person, I just sort of care about that. And just with my own kids, I just see every child has this completely different personality, different tendencies. One wants to blow all them, one's super generous and blows every penny they get, not just on themselves, but even on their friends. The other one is like a really miserly, and every penny is going to keep it themselves, and I'm not going to spend a penny on anybody. And it's just who they are. And just knowing that, and knowing just myself, how and also it has evolved. Like my spending personality has evolved, and knowing that it's not a fixed characteristic. It's not something that is fixed. It's something that can change, and that's an important thing to also get across, which the book tried to say. So it was that understanding that everyone is different, and understanding that if you try to give a one-size-fits-all solution, it's likely to fail for most people because everyone's so different. So just that realization, and knowing that most books is like, here's the formula. It's like, well, that formula works for Bob, but it doesn't work for Jane. So that was one thing, is trying to make the book a bit different, so that to try to adapt it to the individual as best as I could. And just, again, knowing from personal experience and from our customers how true this is. And then for me personally, again, as I mentioned, not only did I have a lot of bad habits, which improved, but also a lot of my tendencies, just as I became a father, as they sort of mature and get older and priorities change. And the biggest thing, and definitely is the big thing with investing, is when you're younger, you just don't assume, you don't think about the future. You don't care. There's too much to do today, right now, and things that are far away, you don't care about. Which is a problem with any young person most these days, is what's the point? What's even the point of trying to worry about something 20 years down the road? And when you get 20 years down the road, you're like, oh, shoot, I wish you would have, done that. And the key though is that thing that you should have done, if it cannot make my life worse off today, I'm more likely to do it. And that's the point I try to get across in the book, is like, you can do things today that will help you 20 years from now that don't make life worse. So try and do them. But for me, I'd say the biggest thing to help me get to that Zen, which is like sort of that top personality, money personality type, it was more this understand that those daily habits are so important. Like the little things are so important, because I see so much stuff from influencers, like say TikTok influencers, about like sort of mocking people who try to not have the daily coffee because it just means nothing. And instead here, become a day trading genius. And that is such a mistake, because it's not just the fact that those small amounts will add up. Like they actually add up, like they add up to a significant amount. It's more about, I call it the dawn. Like it's this dawn, which is your daily one number. It's like your daily surplus or deficit. Like every day you're spending, you're either in surplus or deficit. And a tiny amount of surplus will lead to a great future. A tiny amount of deficit will lead to a horrible, financial future. And that, I think that's such an important thing that most people don't quite understand. And most people don't understand what their daily deficit or surplus is. And that's like the biggest thing that people seem to try to understand. And that really helped me a lot, because, for example, if you're on $60,000 a year, let's say you're taking home $60,000 a year salary, your daily income just off of that 60,000 is like around 160 pounds a day. And it doesn't sound like a lot, 160 pounds, especially when you think about, let's say if you go for, out for dinner, especially nowadays with how much things cost, like it doesn't take much. And this is assuming this is like no expenses yet.
Is that take home the £160?
If your take home is £60,000 a year.
Oh, so before tax.
Well, it's just an example. So if you after tax took home 60,000, so that means your income is, I'm guessing 100,000 these days based off of that. So see income of 100,000, your take home is 60,000. That would mean your take home actual money is about £160 a day.
Right.
And then you have your expenses, right? You have your mortgage, your rent, your food, everything. So it's not a lot.
Yeah.
And to buy, to go onto Amazon and buy a couple things and go get your coffees and have dinner out, it doesn't take much for you to spend all of that, which is why so many people are in debt, because it's so easy to spend that. Now, that said, it's so easy to not spend it as well, but it's so easy to get into a habit of just the little things, because with the digital economy, with everything contactless and digital, it's so much easier to spend more than you think you've spent. And that's the biggest problem that young people face. Like, it's harder. It's much harder now than when you had cash, you had your checking account, you had, when I grew up, you had like a little book with a little printout, and you get your interest amount in there. And to take money out, you had to actually go to the ATM machine.
Yeah.
Take out. This even when they had an ATM machine. Before the ATM machine would have been even harder. You had to go to the bank. To the teller. Yeah. So there was friction, and that friction was actually quite useful for people to not frivolously spend money. Whereas now it's too easy. And the way human nature is, and the way always on marketing is, it's too easy to be gone with your money. And that's the biggest problem, I think, in today's society. Like, it's not even cost of living. It's too easy to spend your money from all avenues at all times.
I think that's such a valuable point. One of the rules of your book was to understand others. And I quite liked the sort of reflecting on the ways in which we are encouraged to spend. So like you mentioned, the sort of friction between actually paying for something or, getting a hold of your cash, like they've pretty much disappeared. There is like a huge gamification of money now. It all happens electronically, and it's slightly more difficult to kind of have those controls on it. When it comes to, I suppose, recognizing those patterns potentially in your daily habits, because they might just happen unconsciously, what are some of the tips that people can take away to kind of, get a hold of, actually, maybe you are just spending a bit too much on, frivolous purchases and stuff like that?
Yeah, the main advice I had for that was to do some sort of an audit. And the audit, it sounds painful, and it is a bit painful, but it's more painful in terms of you're sort of seeing your demons in real time. You're sort of seeing what is happening, because most people will be shocked or surprised at how much they actually spend on certain categories and certain things. And you need to come face to face to it. So to me, the only way is you have to come face to face to your spending. And so you have to just take a look. And it's as simple as looking back at your past statements and categorizing it. And some apps do a great job, but they sort of will summarize that for you. Yeah. So I'll say, this month you spent.
There's a few of those apps now, aren't there? Like, I think Emma and
Snoop is pretty good as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's a great way of just opening your eyes into where your money is going. And then once you do that, hopefully there are a few surprises that you sort of can see different from what you expected. And then you want to try and then the next step is you got to make a change or decide to make a change. As in, well, would life be worse off if I, for example, didn't have, I always say the coffee thing, I'm not trying to beat on coffee shops, but how much things cost there nowadays. Like it adds up, especially for the typical young person. I see it with my daughter. So I just see how fast the money sort of filters away to nothing. And she always will run out and isn't aware, but is also really relaxed about it. And whereas if she could have it, thousands of pounds of investments had she not sort of drank it or spent it, or eaten it. So it's trying to teach this. So I guess a bit of a tangent there, but that's her particular example. but people will often, I call it the waste spend. It's like, is your life actually improved from this? And how much is it improved from this? And is it worth, I guess, is it worth it? You have to have those hard questions, ask those hard questions and answer them, because as you say, there's always a trade-off in life. And some of those trade-offs need to be, okay, I'm going to sort of sacrifice this consumption today because I want to invest that for the future. And so in my book, I try to get the idea of that sort of save and accumulation can be fun. It actually is quite fun, because once you get into it, it's very fun to try and see something else grow. Like you want to try and gamify it. And this is also where I think there's an opportunity more for FinTech once again to gamify the savings and investing side of this journey, to make save and investing as fun as spending. Because spending, like, you get a dopamine rush when you spend, to the point where people will often buy something and then they'll buy something again tomorrow because that rush from yesterday is already gone. And even they might even return the item because, like, you just get a dopamine rush from shopping. And again, the book, one thing I suggested, like, just go window shopping. Like, it's fun to go into a shop and look around the stuff that you might have, but give yourself a rule not to buy it that day. Maybe give yourself a rule you have to wait 3 days before you buy it. And you'll find often, like, you don't really care anymore, or you don't have as much of an urge to have, that thing, because you sort of, whatever that sort of rush was, sort of got out of your system. So yeah, but it starts with an audit, and it starts with asking yourself hard questions. And then you have to really decide, you have to be really honest with yourself, like, how much enjoyment does this give to my life? And if you're not sure, experiment for a bit. Try to cut something out for a bit, like but just start with something small. Like, this week, I'm going to try not to have, let's say, that daily coffee, and then I'm going to force that into a savings account, or ideally an investment account, and see if I feel, worse off in life than have that daily coffee, or if I adjusted things.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more.
The gamification thing can be a little bit like Duolingo. Do you use this sort of gamification thing? And, my father's learning different languages at the moment. And I've seen him on Christmas Day going, I gotta go and do my Duolingo or I'm going to lose my spot on the leaderboard. And I'm like, it's Christmas Day. But I want to just go back to something, because I'm really interested to see what your take is on this. The personalities that you mention in your book. There was a piece of research that was released recently, well, not that recently, actually, about how your financial habits are formed by the age of 7. I'm sure you've probably come across it. I mean, I'm from a family of a lot of siblings, and the personalities are very different. We've got people who won't spend at all and who hoard money. And then people who money is like water through their fingers. It just disappears instantly, it comes in. And we were all brought up exactly the same. And I was like, hang on a minute. How can this be right? What's your take on it and your experience?
Yeah, so my view is things are much more fluid. So even like my personal experience. So when I was younger, because I have 5 siblings, so I come from a big family, and my parents were very strict, and just in terms of everything, but especially with money. And we all were given, it was called like an allowance. That was equivalent to pocket money, but it had to be saved. So I think I'd saved something like $10,000 at the time I was in high school from my allowance that I never ever spent. I wasn't allowed to spend it, so I had to keep on saving it. And
but you could have spent it. Is that right? Or was it like in a junior ISA or? Well,
it was in what there is called a credit union, so it was like a bank account. But I don't think I could have even gotten it out if I wanted to. So it was like, so I wasn't like I wasn't necessarily disciplined. I just couldn't. I wasn't allowed to, and I couldn't. And you had to drive the car to the town. I lived in a farm, so I couldn't have gotten it anyways. So I'm not sure. So I didn't learn anything I didn't learn any discipline, even though I was saving. But I forget how I once somehow got cash, like say $10, and I bought a magazine. I was into cars. I bought like a car magazine. And like I remember my mom caught it and I got in so much trouble. So I wasted my money on this car magazine. I spent like $3 at the time or $2. And I got in so much trouble. And because I was quite a good child. I felt so bad and so guilty to bought this magazine. And so I didn't spend anything. But at the same time, I had a great childhood. Like not like I felt like I missed out on anything. And I had a part-time job and had everything so I had a part-time job eventually. And so that I could have accessed in theory, but I put it all in, I saved it all up and saved everything. But so I talk about this in my book. So in theory, say like, okay, I was this really frugal, I would save. Again, I liked things. So I remember like I just spend in high school, I could spend on stuff. So I had a few big purchases. Like I once bought a mountain bike and I once bought a computer. And those are like, I researched for like 8 months. I'd research for 8 months. This is before internet. So I'm buying magazines to do my research on the mountain bikes and the computers. And, but I thought, okay, I'll justify it because if I buy my magazine for $3 and if I can save myself $100 or $50, it's a good investment. So everything I did was quite thoughtful. And so like I said, you would think that based off of this, you could just imagine how I might be as an adult. And there definitely is that within me. However, when I finally sort of had access to money, I graduated and got I'd say it was my second job. My first job things were quite tight still. My second job, I moved to the States and relatively speaking, less tax, bigger income, US dollar versus Canadian dollar. I also had a ton of money. And I went, relatively speaking, I went a bit nuts. And I bought like all the video game systems because as a kid, I was never allowed to have like a Nintendo. I could never have a Nintendo. So I bought the Nintendo, the Sega, the place. I bought them all. And I never played them. I just bought them all because I could buy them all. And then as in the basketball, I bought like I bought like 5 different pairs of basketball sneakers because I could.
Oh my God. Wow. David, talk to me about basketball sneakers. This house is all about basketball sneakers. Like, I need to take out shares in Nike.
Yeah, I can relate. And so I had this, like in a way, it's almost because I was so repressed that I had to get it out of my system because the environment, it's tempting you all the time and the stuff that you want. And because I didn't get it out of my system, I had this sort of need to just sort of experience this all. And so part of the lessons in the book, by the way, is like, you need to let kids make more of these mistakes younger in a way to get out of their system. So that thrill is gone. It's almost like, okay, whatever. And I can focus on other things now because I got it out of my system. So because I was so repressed in a way, and my parents meant well, and they did a lot of benefit because I paid for university because I had saved had no student debt. So a lot of benefits came from that. I hadn't learned enough discipline. And because that discipline, because when you're on your own, you got no one looking over your shoulder and you have to have discipline. So I didn't have, oddly, I didn't have enough discipline because it was basically my parents enforcing the discipline and I never learned it myself. And again, my personality, I'm a bit rebellious. So like I was always a good kid, but I still have this is why I do the startup because I'm just like I have a very small rebellious streak that trying to does good things with the rebellion, but it's in me and I want to sort of do things myself and do it my way and do it on my own. And I rebelled with sort of blowing money and like I could have had millions more than I have now if I made some smarter decisions in my 20s because I'd come across money. I think I mentioned in the book again, like that was very serendipitous, like my life in terms of having like events happen. So I probably had, I'd say 5 or 6 events of money that most people may never have in their lifetime. Just like I'm just lucky, I guess, coming from a very poor farm family. But each time until recently, those money events, I would sort of blow it. And again, like I said, because I never had been taught what to do with, like, say, a lot of money, especially because my parents never had that. My parents just grinded their way and they did well in the end, but they grinded for 50, 60 years. So they sort of did these lessons almost inherently and it worked out, but they grinded for 60 years. I would get a chunk of money that most people will never get in their lifetime. And so I didn't know what to do with it. So if I would have been smart with it, at that time. It just, my life would have been completely different. Like I probably wouldn't have had to, work for my 40s. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but I think a lot of your personality will change based on, but I think that your core childhood will ingrain certain habits that aren't evident. I don't think they're evident though. Like I said, with me, you would never have been able to guess if you saw my childhood, how I would have acted in my 20s. And it's because I experienced things without that sort of baseline discipline and habits. And it's hard to guess how someone will unless they do. And that's why one of the tenets of this book is like almost like throw your kid in the, not the deep end, but like the sort of slightly deeper, shallow end where you can sort of overlook them, but let them sort of struggle a little bit so that they can sort of almost come to their own, they have to sort of fight their own instincts and have to get in a little bit of trouble, and they have to sort of try and get the way out of it. And they have to sort of do something that they regret, but in a way that's not going to be really harmful. Like those experiences, I think, are so important, like financially, I'm talking financially, where they have to sort of deal with not being able to get something because they made some stupid decision. At the same time, only let them do with a part of their money. And you sort of you have to almost, unless some kids will just do the right thing, but most kids won't. And you have to somehow guide the right side. And then you can sort of eventually show them, like, listen, here's what's happening with this other money that you haven't had access to. So I think, if you're in a position that you can do that. So I guess that what I'm saying is it's so hard to know. And you don't really know until people are tested. And so I think the problem is most children aren't tested enough. So I think the research I haven't read the study in depth, but I suspect if you were to sort of, they come to that conclusion, but then they inject different experiences on these children in their more adolescence, I'm sure the outcomes will vary completely depending on what things they've faced, what sort of trials and tribulations they faced as teens. I guess that's my thought there. And I think once you reach your 20s, I think it becomes a lot more set, because now you're at the age where you have experienced a lot of, I guess, trials and tribulations, and you've either figured stuff out or you haven't figured stuff out. And once again, it's like a personality thing. Like, are you the kind of person who's got that growth mindset where you're going to try and learn, or you have this sort of fixed mindset where you sort of give up? And I think that's a bigger indicator of what's going to happen with your money. Because a lot of people just give up.
I think that's such a valuable point. And knowing that wherever you are, there is the opportunity to evolve through it and improve your situation. So if you may have one of the personality types that's a bit more impulsive, or, you spend a little bit more frivolously, that doesn't have to be set in motion. You can kind of take steps to move into a spending habit that's a bit more beneficial for you and sort of anyone that you're living with. One thing that it'll be great to learn more about is, how have conversations around money been for you? I know you mentioned, your parents were quite strict around spending when you were younger, but was money something that you talked about quite openly? And when you kind of decided that you wanted to change your spending habits, how open were you with that journey?
Yeah, so money was quite open in our family. And like I was always like with my dad, it was always sort of top of his mind. And like I mentioned in the book, but he always, he hated debt. So all debt was bad to the point where he paid off his mortgage within years. And if they had a credit card, it was just because of, you had to use it not that we ever went on a flight, but you may have had to use it to book a hotel room or something. But there was never any debt was never used in our family. So I was always taught that. And I think that was actually a good lesson, because I think debt is one of the biggest problems, again, facing young people. Whether it's the buy now, pay later schemes, and credit cards have become an extension of trying to sort of live a certain lifestyle. So money was always talked about openly. And to the point where when I came across, say, large amounts of money in my 20s, and at the time I was buying cars, and I'd come home from Boston in like a nice car, and I'd be like, hey mom, check out my nice car. And she always called me Maddie. I was like, oh, Maddie, why don't you should buy a house? Like, why are you buying these cars? And she was right. I should have just bought a house. But she would say it to me all the time. But she was never judgmental, but she'd always sort of shake her head, like sort of, what are you doing? But I wish she would have been more judgmental. When I look back, like, why'd you let me buy these cars? Even though I was like 26 or so. So they were very open, but they also weren't judgmental, and they let us sort of live our life, like, our mistakes to make. They're very much, you're now an adult, you sort of live your life. So, but they would say it. It's like, why are you doing that? And I was like, yeah, I want to. So it was always open, I have to say. It was always open. And we could always talk comfortably about money. And like, none of my siblings, no one has any kind of debt issues. Like, so we're all, from that perspective, we all sort of got those lessons well. So I think that was a really good lesson from my childhood, was this openness to talk about money, to sort of not even get into trouble. Like, before trouble starts, we sort of knew to sort of how to head it off. So for me, with my kids, always talked about money, open about money, even if there was. But however, the one thing I'll say is, if there is like sort of stress, because you're doing a startup, money can be difficult as a startup founder, and no income, certainly not when you're at the investment bank in terms of my situation. So everything sort of changes. So I always would shield the kids. I don't want them to be nervous about money. I just never wanted my kids to feel scared. That was I was like, insulate my kids from that part of life, because they're kids, like, enjoy life. Now, that said, I want them to understand the value of money and how you have to be very thoughtful about how you spend it. And so they can't just have whatever they want. So I always try to get that balance of being honest about money, but shield them from the discomfort of the messy adult things that they don't need to know about, because kids will sometimes endure an anxiety that is not helpful for them. So there's a balancing act as a parent, I think, that you need. And again, I don't know if I've done it perfectly well, but they all have seemed to just be quite happy kids. And I'm not sure if they got the money lessons yet based on the spending, but I'm also hoping that, because I know with me, sometimes things eventually, they sort of come together eventually. But
it's quite difficult when you're in finance and you're a parent, because you feel this sort of responsibility to impart some wisdom on your children, whereas most parents are probably muddling through it quite naturally. But you also, I mean, I don't know how old your children are, but mine are teenagers, and they kind of like, oh, God, stop already. I'm like, okay, but listen to me, because I'm telling you something that's going to set you up for life. No, I'm like, okay, you kids are really bougie these days, and you don't know what's good for you. But they're also sort of going into this quite a difficult environment, where it's very difficult for them, or it's going to be very difficult for them to navigate financially. Harder to buy a house, harder to stay out of debt. What you're saying about how convenient it is to spend money now. And I mean, right from early ages, when they're being hammered on things like Roblox to buy Robux. What are they? I'm like, what do you get for it? And they're like, some avatar stuff. And I'm like, you get nothing. That is nothing.
yeah.
So it's, and yeah, it's finding that, as a parent, finding that balance of when to like step in and go, no, you're making a massive mistake, and when to just let them make the mistakes. But like you said, you do need to make some mistakes. And what I tend to do is just go, okay, listen, you can't go to that cinema trip that all your mates are going on because you spent your money on Robux, and now you can't afford that. And those are harsh lessons to learn, but really important for kids. But it's a really difficult sort of situation. And as you say, you've got the kids who will automatically save everything, and you've got the kids who will automatically spend everything. So it's sort of like trying to find that nice little sort of balance in between it all, where you can be helpful to both sorts of personalities.
That's exactly right. So I have 2 teenagers and then 2 younger ones. And as I said, like, they're all quite different. And my oldest, who's 17, turning 18, she's the most generous person to a fault. But the problem is, like, will spend everything she gets. And it has the most, I guess, like a very sweet. So I'll say, like, hey, listen, like, you're eating out every day at lunch. Like, I'll buy whatever groceries you want. Let's pack our food, and let's just be thoughtful. Like, whatever you want, you tell me. You're going to shop on this. I help you prepare at the spot. But we had to plan a little bit. And like, okay, yeah. But won't do it. And then, or there'll be like a day where she's busy, and was like, next thing I'll spend like all her money on like eating out. And I'll say to her, like, listen, like, it's not just about the eating out. It's about these habits. Let me say you go to university or get your first job, like those little daily habits can make all the difference for you. Whether you have to take out even like more of a loan in school because you're always eating out like, 10 times a week versus if you're doing a smart grocery shop, like over 3 or 4 years of a degree, it's going to make a huge impact. So you got to try to just change those habits now and just try to get you investing now, because if you even put like 5 pounds, 10 pounds in, you're just going to learn and become curious. Like, yeah. And she's like, yes, I want to do this. But hasn't really, I haven't forced it yet. So she'll say the right things, but she hasn't, it's not enough of I haven't forced her, and she wants to, but she just sort of can't. So that's an example where I'm soon going to force it. And my son, he'll come to me, he's like, hey, I want to learn about investing and trading because maybe some kids at school spoke about it. So I'll say, hey, I have this book about, like, here's a book about Warren Buffett, and here's a book about value investing and different things. And he'll ask me questions, and he'll be into it for like 4 days. And then he's sort of done. He's on to the next thing. And then he's so mature child. Like he's the one who likes to buy the game things, like the game credits. And like, Dad, I want to get this. And I'm like, no, it's waste. It's like, I really want it. It's like, well, it's your money. You can spend a certain amount. It's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, I'm sure. Then he'll go and buy it. And then almost every time he didn't say the next thing is like, are you glad you bought that thing a week ago? I was like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have. So he fights his instincts as well. And we're like, well, just waste money. So yeah, so I myself, I don't quite know. Like I force certain things, let them learn certain things, but I think I'm still a bit too nice where I don't say no or let them suffer the consequences enough quite yet because I feel bad for them. And that's, again, as a parent, I need to like let them feel the consequences a bit more because I think to help them learn the lesson a bit more. So I'm still figuring this out myself, I have to say.
It is really hard. You're like, oh, I don't want you to miss out. And it sounds really good fun. And I know you're going to be sad. And I don't want you to be sad.
Exactly.
But at the same time, you're like, oh, God, I'm just raising spoiled kids now.
Yeah, exactly.
Have they read your book?
So no. And yeah. And now they've read sections and chapters, and they have copies and they're sort of proud of it. But, but no.
I bet they'll come back to it in time.
I think they need to sit an exam on the contents of your book.
Yeah, I guess I think they will eventually. Like I said, I haven't forced it, but yeah. So no.
That is really interesting. I mean, I think it also raises a valuable point that for some people, the thought of managing money can just be very overwhelming, and you can almost maybe bury your head in the sand a little bit, or just not have the confidence or courage to face your bank statement or maybe try one of the budgeting apps. Do you kind of have any nuggets of advice for anybody looking to make that first step and just, break through the fear and face what might have been bubbling away all this time?
Yeah. So I guess like the focus, as I mentioned in the book, it's about spending. So the first thing I would recommend to anyone, try to save some nominal amount. Just save some nominal amount relative to you, but put it in a different place from where you normally put it. And I'm talking like it might be 5 pounds in the week. There's something a little bit different where you're doing something different and you're setting something aside and invest it. So, and this, everyone gets over like, oh, invest, they don't know what to do. And this is where, again, I talk about in the book, it's like open up a trading 2-in-2 account or some other like a cheap free account and put that money into I just recommend an S&P ETF. But set aside some nominal spending amount and put it into an investment. So that can take you 5 minutes and anyone can do it. And if you do that one little thing, that will hopefully then lead you to start to reevaluate a lot of different things, because most people just never do that step. Most people never do that step. 90% of the population, 95% of the population never does that one step. And if they have anything, they might have a pension thing that they don't ever see. And that's good if you have that. But if you can somehow connect your daily life and realize like there's waste. There's just waste in my spending. There's waste. You take that waste and invest it. That's the principle. That's the whole principle of the book. Take any waste in your spending in your life and invest it. And if it's small amounts on a regular basis, you don't have to worry about bubbles and whatever. It doesn't matter. Now that said, if you're given £1 million today, that's a whole different conversation. You have to be worried about bubbles, and because that's, I'm worried about bubbles. and what you do. But if you're just doing it small amounts and you're going to do it over time, you don't care about anything about the market, you just get it in there. So that's my advice. Like, somehow connect your daily spend, connect it to the concept of waste, but get started. Just get started with £5.
I think that's such sound advice, because it's that first step that people seem to find so difficult. And actually, once you experience that wobble at the very start, which often happens, and then you see it all start to even out, and then you see it go up, that's it. That's all you need. And you get to that point and you're like, oh my God, I need to put more in. I've got to get more doing that. And yeah, it can have a really profound effect. It's just that courage to make that initial step. And as you say, you can do it with a £5. And it doesn't have to be a life-changing amount, just to get over that hurdle. And then all you need is patience.
Exactly. Because I think it's that step, what it does is and then makes you start to reflect on everything, all the daily habits. Because once you take that first step, as you say, you have the volatility and stuff, and a lot of people can't handle that. But if it's a small amounts, hopefully you realize like this was all just waste. This otherwise would have been wasted. So you try to, again, it's also a good lesson, like to just ignore the volatility, but because you keep on adding to it from your waste, it should be growing in that, separate from the market. It's growing just because, you're saving in a different alternative place. But the most important thing I think it does for people is it gets you to eliminate the waste in your spend. It just eliminates the waste, makes life more efficient. And then once you have that mindset, once you start to change that, it changes so much more. Everything involving your career, your relationships, you start to just be a bit more thoughtful about stuff you're doing to make it have more purpose. Yeah. And I think what happens is by becoming an investor, you start to put more purpose into all aspects of your life. Like, there's so many positive benefits from this.
Yes, exactly. Because every spend you go, hang on, if I didn't spend this and I put it into the investments, it could turn into this. Mm-hmm. But it's nuts, because people go to the races and stick a tenner on the horses. But they're too worried about the volatility with the fibre in the first instance. And you're like, come on, you need to just take that. You just need to just take that step, make that first move. And after that, you'll be hooked. You really will.
Exactly.
It's such a gratifying process. And you'll get a lot more from it than you will at the races.
Exactly. And you say it doesn't take much. And most people don't take that step. And they're like, there's a huge opportunity just for the country for people to take that step and to then become more invested in terms of, I guess, what's happening in politics in a way, and hopefully in a positive way, to realize here are the impacts of these different things, because you realize how it's going to affect your investments on some level. And you just start to care a bit more, and you start to think more about, if you have children, about them taking that step. And then it starts to become, hopefully, this nice self-fulfilling prophecy where you just create this habit, and the habit spreads to other people. And you just, like I said, you take that waste and you put it into a positive purpose.
Amazing. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And congratulations again for your book. We'll make sure we put some links in the show notes so that people can find you and also purchase as well, because it's genuinely life-changing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the recognition for the book. I really appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.